Welcome to Biblical Theology. Today we have a really interesting discussion about a monotheistic passage from the Old Testament that's applied to Jesus in the New. And of course, this touches on the idea of Jesus as God, and in particular, passages about the Tetragrammaton, God's holy name, YHWH, and how those relate to Jesus in the New Testament. We're looking at 1 Corinthians 8, 4 through 6, and something called the Shema. Now, the Shema is the main Jewish prayer. The instruction in Deuteronomy 6 is that everyone should say the Shema at least 3 times a day when you get up, sometime during the day and before you go to sleep. And what we're going to see is that many people think that the Shema is actually being mentioned in 1 Corinthians 8, 4 through 6. And we want to look at that argument today as we go through this text. Of course, this channel is dedicated to seeing Old Testament Christology and how the Old Testament is related to New Testament Christology. And we, as always, want to take a very careful look at what the Old Testament actually says and then how it's being applied in the New Testament. So our passage for today is 1 Corinthians 8, 4 through 6. And this is part of Paul's letter, and apparently the Corinthians ask a series of questions. What about marriage and things like that? This is the next question. What about eating of things sacrificed to idols? And the Corinthians apparently had asked Paul a question and then given Paul their initial reading, their initial understanding of how they should think through this issue of meat sacrificed to idols. And so the argument is, we know, meaning all Christians know, that an idol is nothing in the cosmos. So, if you're sacrificing meat to idols, idols don't really exist. And we also know, so this is the Corinthians saying the things they know. We know that an idol is nothing, and we know that there is no God except one entity. And of course, this is the masculine singular of haste me a hen. So there's only one person who can truly be called theos, and that is then in contrast to everything that is not on the one God side, that is everything that is an idol. And what we have then with this gar is going to be a support for this statement. And I'm a little unclear whether this is Paul's adding his own support for the argument or if it's the Corinthians' support of their position. My hunch is that it's Paul's support. And what he says is, for even if there are so-called gods, so things that are treated as gods, idols, but not really God, even if there are so-called gods, and then he splits it into 2 categories, whether in heaven, whether on earth, and then he adds this parenthetical expression, just as there are gods many and lords many. So you can see that the so-called gods become gods and lords. And he's going here for And then he's going to say, yet for us, and I'll pull it up here, yet for us there is one God, and that one God is described as the Father, and that one God is from whom all things are, and we exist towards him. So you've got from whom and towards him. And then notice that we also have this statement, and there is one Lord, Jesus Christ, through whom all things are, and we exist through him. A couple of things to notice, that formula, from whom and through whom and to whom, is used at the end of Romans 11, just to describe God as he is. God is the one from whom and through whom and to whom are all things. And so I did hear a prominent scholar one time who tried to argue, through whom means that Jesus isn't on some kind of secondary level. And I raised my hand and I said, Professor so-and-so, I used the man's name, and I said, did you know that that exact phrase is used of God in the last verse in Romans 11? And he said, I didn't know that. And he said, I wrote this article in a hotel room, and I thought to myself, wow, that's a really poor indictment that our scholars don't even look up the cross references in Nestle Aland, but apparently he hadn't, and if he had looked up, he wouldn't say the kind of just unsupported position. So what we have then is, if we put Paul's argument, and this goes back to a paper that James M. Robinson, did when he was a student at Columbia Theological Seminary, I believe. I'm not certain about that, but I think it was a student paper. And he points out that what you have is, on this side, everything that is false, and on this side you have everything that's true. And so you get the comparison, an idol is nothing except one God is something. And so you have the no idol, and nothing is a God except one. And then we have this comparison for, even if there are so-called gods, and then that's going to be developed like this, just as there are gods many and lords many, so the so-called gods become in heaven and on the earth. But notice that what you have here is a comparison between so-called gods and the one true God. And notice that that one true God is then divided into one God and one Lord. And you can probably see, I can imagine, you have the word many contrasting the one, and you have the word many contrasting the one Lord. Now, what's interesting is, if you have false here and true here, notice that the one Lord is described as Jesus Christ. And then you have this formula, from whom, through whom, and to whom are all things, and you've got part of that formula applied to the Father, and part of that formula applied to Jesus. Now, if we kind of clear this drawing up a little bit, you really do have the argument of so-called gods, God's many and Lord's many, and then the one true God, but put in that is one God and one Lord. And remember that this is the dividing line between the false and the true. And clearly, Jesus Christ is on that true side. Some scholars, and if you want to explore more fully, there is an excellent PhD thesis. I think it's 1 Corinthians 8:6 and Monotheism. I believe it was written by Paul Rainbow at Oxford in the late 80s. Excellent work. But as I understand his argument, he's saying, you've got this dividing line, and it's between the divine here, the one divine, and then all that's falsely called divine here. And it's clear that Jesus is on the truly divine side. If we add the idea of the Shema, this is the prayer that Paul would have said 3 times a day since he was a very small child. Shema Israel, at least part of it. Shema Israel, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. And notice that, the Lord is one. Remember, you don't say the Tetragrammaton out loud. You replace it with the word Adonai. If you just type in Jewish person saying the Shema, you can hear it. Shema Israel, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Well, notice when you say Adonai, you aren't saying Adoni, my Lord, singular. Adonai is actually plural. And Eloheinu, that Elohim is plural. So literally, my Lord's, our Elohim. And then we repeat the Tetragrammaton. Adonai, our Lord's, is Echad, is one entity. So you've got this in a spoken Shema and in the written Shema with this word, but in the spoken Shema, all 3 of these words, you have plurality, but then that plurality is described as a unity, Echad. And so some scholars think that Paul's splitting the Shema here and applying it to God the Father and Jesus. I find that argument very convincing. Encourage you to look at Rainbow's thesis, but as always, I look forward to your interaction with these videos, and I'll look forward to talking to you next time. Thanks.